Hey guys, hi, welcome back once again. My name is Vaishali, and today I'd like to talk about critical thinking, or rather, developing critical thinking abilities which might provide us to have a more holistic view of ourselves and of others. So, when I looked into understand the definition of critical thinking, this is what I came across. Critical thinking has been described as an ability to question, to acknowledge and test previously held assumptions, to recognize ambiguity, to examine, interpret, evaluate, reason, and reflect, to make informed judgments and decisions, and to clarify, articulate, and justify positions. There was a shorter definition also which came across like this: the practice of resisting assumptions, considering alternative perspectives, and doing your research to form an objective conclusion that holds true for you. Now, all of that is saying to question assumptions, to have healthy skepticism about previously held assumptions, which in fact cannot exist without curiosity and creativity. It's also saying to do the research to draw your own personal interpretation of things, of ideas, of beliefs, of thoughts that you had framed and formed for yourself. Or it could also have been the resultants of ideas that had been passed down to us, passed over to us, passed across to us. And we absorbed it, probably even without questioning it, without getting curious about it. We took that information blindly. So I can take this example to demonstrate what critical thinking skills might look like. In order to have multiple perspectives existing at the same time, in order for multiple truths to exist in the same breath at the same time. So most of us, while we were growing up, during our developmental years, during our formative years, must have heard of the story of the ants and the grasshopper. And of course, as per the narrative of the author, we were told that ants were hard-working creatures, while as the grasshopper was a lazy one, whiling away his time. The ants were the proactive and the responsible one, while as the grasshopper was the lazy and the irresponsible one. He was the one who was carefree. And some similar kind of messages or the moral of the story were handed down to us. And most of us had absorbed those messages without questioning it, without having a healthy skepticism and a healthy discussion about it. And when I say that, I'm not dismissing the author's point of view. That's not to deny that version or the author's version of their truth. But when I reflect on it today, it rather seems very simplistic to me. It rather comes across as absolutely black and white, which in my understanding kind of misses the gray zone where human existence exists, where human experience both survives and thrives. So when I today look at it, I can see a lot of nuances within that framework, within that story. And the first thing that strikes me is the very title of the story, The Ants and the Grasshopper. On one hand, we are taking a plural terminology, quite literally in English dictionary, and on the other hand, we are taking a singular aspect, the grasshopper. On one hand, we are talking about the social creatures. On the other hand, we are talking about a solitary reaper, a solitary creature. And when I get that perspective today, I kind of understand that human is the only social creature or a solitary creature that can choose its social groups, that can choose its social community, that can choose its inner and its outer circle. And human is also the only social creature that can choose its solitary space, that can choose to be alone when it wishes some alone time, some me time. Nature has given this privilege of choices and of responsibility to no other creature on this planet as of today. Now, if we go back to the story and consider the ants, who are a part of the social structure, who've got a leader and that leader has followers, that work in a community, that are responsible not only for themselves but also for the larger community, that work in a very straight line, that cannot afford to have a fallout because having a fallout would quite literally mean death, that are conformed and confined by their social community, that are not just responsible for themselves but are also responsible for others. And that is why they need to keep a vigilant eye on the future and thereby work today. The future that predictably will get very cold and very harsh and will give them no choice to gather food for themselves and their community. We also might get an understanding that over here being a rebel with or without a cause will also mean a fallout, will also entail that one or two or few individuals or few ants will need to stand out from the group. And standing out from the group with such a social conformity might not always be very pleasant, will come with its consequences that might be very harsh, that can even quite literally be dangerous. So over here, blindly adhering to the norms of the group is quite literally the safest and the best thing to do. It's the best survival tactic to have. It also entails that quite likely there will be a sense of blind loyalty. While as if you look at the grasshopper on the other hand, who is a solitary creature, solitary reaper, we'll also understand that he is his own follower and his own leader. For there is no group or there is no community that it fits into, that it can be a part of. It's also somebody that does not understand the concept of following a line, of walking in a line. So quite naturally, it's the one that takes big stripes and big leaps and big jumps. It's also somebody who might be considered as careless, as eccentric, and creative as well. For he's the one who's creating music and his own dance steps. He might be considered as careless and lazy, but he's also the only one who's responsible for his own well-being because there's nobody else to support him and have his back. And thereby he's quite autonomous by nature. And then we can keep unpacking and dissecting the multi-layers aspect of being a social creature and of being a solitary creature or a solitary reaper. And in my understanding, since humans are the only ones that get to choose both of these spectrums, of course, with its own set of consequences, we are also the only one who get to experience the nuances of both of these sides and thereby gauge our strengths and weaknesses with regards to both of these paradigms, with regards to the existence of both of these realities in the same breath and at the same time. So I'll back it up by yet another practical experience that I experienced and witnessed just a few days back. So on one hand, we can say that we are an abundantly populated country, one of the countries with abundance of human resource, one of the countries to probably have a large social network, one of the nations to have the youngest population and thereby the youngest brains. And if we consider the law of the jungle, which is in numbers, given that context, we should be the strongest in the world, as per the law of the jungle, that strength is in numbers. And maybe to some degree, all of that might be true. And yet another perspective, another parallel reality that coexists is that as I was driving, I noticed that because of the road constructions happening in my city, the road that I was driving on, the road that I was taking, was jam-packed with vehicles and with people. And there was an ambulance that needed space, that needed to move out and move through that crowd, to be able to take the person who was inside it to a hospital, and it could not do so. It was stuck because of this huge population. the overflooding of population on the roads. The siren of the ambulance was constantly going on, demanding and requesting people to give it some space to allow it to move. But unfortunately, it could only move at that ant space, at the snail space. It had to conform to the line of the crowd on the road because there was no space for it to move ahead. Unless, of course, it chose to do something that could have been drastic for the maximum number of people that were on the road. And here were these two parallel realities coexisting. On one hand, having a young, dynamic, abundant population. On the other hand, it giving no space to somebody that probably needed to be attended on an emergency basis. Likewise, we can say that having a sense of loyalty to a group, to a community, towards ourselves, towards our people, whoever those people might be, is an amazing thing to have. For having no sense of loyalty to us as humans feels quite dangerous, feels quite appalling. And yet questioning ourselves that are we blindly loyal to something, to some beliefs, to some thoughts, may not also be functional and healthy. Likewise, understanding that most of us have been taught that vulnerability is a weakness, is a sign of weakness. For we can be hurt because of vulnerability, that we can be taken advantage of because of vulnerability. But vulnerability is also the birthplace of having open-hearted and open-minded relationships, interpersonal interactions. Vulnerability is also the birthplace of creativity. Vulnerability is also, to some degree, the birthplace of courage. Because it is only when we are vulnerable can we be open and can we allow ourselves to trust. Can we allow somebody else to be open and somebody else to trust us as well. And yet, vulnerability without boundaries or without negotiation of boundaries might not be functional and healthy. So on one hand, not being vulnerable at all, and on the other spectrum, on the other extreme, being too vulnerable without having any boundaries or negotiation of boundaries is dysfunctional, is unhealthy. And so vulnerability and trust and open-heartedness and open-mindedness with boundaries can be our strength. And having no vulnerability and thereby having none of those aspects, or being too vulnerable without having any boundaries, might be a disaster in the making. So if we take all of these and all of the other human aspects that we tend to describe ourselves by, that we have experienced in our lives, can we ever truly claim that our strength is our strength at all points in time and that our weaknesses are our weaknesses at all points in time? Can we ever say that at times our weaknesses have never played as our strengths? And can we ever say that our strengths at times have never played as our weaknesses? So if we take all of these and all of the other human aspects that we tend to describe ourselves by, that we have experienced in our lives, can we ever truly claim that our strength is our strength at all points in time and that our weaknesses are our weaknesses at all points in time? Can we ever say that at times our weaknesses have never played as our strengths? Can we ever say that our strengths at times have never played as our weaknesses? And in my understanding, most of the times we'll not be able to say that with certainty. We'll not be able to lay a claim on that with definite certainty. And because we are the only creatures as of today on the planet who can experience both the spectrums of being a social creature and choosing our social groups, and being a solitary creature and choosing solitude for ourselves for a while, since we get that array of choices, the freedom to choose within that spectrum or in that spectrum, in that huge spectrum, that freedom also comes not just with responsibilities, because freedom is responsibility, but it also comes with its own set of confusions. For every choice comes with its set of consequences. So can we then to some degree also say that if freedom is responsibility because it's allowing us the choices to respond, freedom probably also comes with confusion, and probably a whole lot of confusion at times, which then kind of gives us the perspective that multiple perspectives can exist and do exist in the same breath and at the same time, that multiple realities and multiple truths can coexist together in the same breath and at the same time. And as much as we'd like to have clarity most of the times, well, then maybe clarity to some degree also comes with conformity. And in my understanding, when we are able to have these multiple perspectives, we can actually get quite amazed and awestruck by the number of choices that we have, that we get to make, that we get to experience, which not only enhances our curiosity and thereby a healthy skepticism, but also enhances our critical thinking skills, which enables us shift our realities, shift our perspectives in more ways than we probably think possible, giving our lives an enriching experience, an enriched experience that probably only humans get to experience. And in my personal understanding, once we develop the ability to think critically, we get to understand our own contextual strengths and weaknesses a whole lot better. We also get a chance to develop our emotional and our relational intelligence as well. So let's try and think about developing our critical thinking abilities. Let's try and reflect on all of the aspects that gives us the choice to experience our own human experience. Let's try and reflect on all of those aspects, and I will see you once again the next week. Till then, stay tuned in. And guys, if you do like the contextual content of these videos, please do like, share, and subscribe.